and transition. Did I do that? Did I do that right,
Yes,
y'all?
indeed.
Cool. I can see you. I can see me. I can hear me. I can hear you. Can everybody else hear the doctor in the house here? Yeah, it looks like they can. Cool. So I'm gonna get into it, guys. First off, thanks for being here. I'm Chris. I go by Voices Chris on here and all over social media. Every Wednesday, do a unreleased demo listening stream, and every Friday, I get to interview amazing, inspiring, educational, awesome, every other kind of descriptor, word, adjective you can think of, people like Dr. MarQo Patton over here. He's a professor of music business, vocalist, and writer currently residing in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm in Nashville too, in case anybody didn't know that already. Thank you, Fading, for
Music
for
City.
yeah for dropping the guest info in there. His research explores creative efficacy in a digital and globalized era. Patton is a scholar who puts theory to practice. We're going to talk about his experiences and his first ever published work, Creative Innovation: A Creative's Guide to Creative Efficacy. First off, am I saying that word right? Because every time I ask the Google robot if I'm saying that word right, I get slightly varied responses. So, am I saying it right? First off,
That's how I say it. Absolutely, efficacy. Yep.
man, I'm learning new words every day, and I was just like, and I know the meanings of them, but it's just like all of the different ways you can kind of twist words and the different spellings of stuff. I don't know. It's obviously inspiring to me as somebody who has to write a million emails a day. Now I have a new word to add to that. But I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, but if you guys in the chat have any questions for Dr. MarQo here, please put them in the chat. So I'm going to just start with, first off, my username came from when I was a band in high school. Like, where did Just Real come from?
Oh man, that is an excellent
we're,
question,
we're
Chris.
starting we're
First of
starting
all,
there.
we're starting it, and you really start me at the very beginning of all of this. First off, I'd like to say thank you so much. It's awesome to be a part of such a great endeavor. I admire what you do. We connected some time ago in some various different spaces, which we have an opportunity to explore. But when I think about the pseudonym, right, just real, it's weird because I was sort of moving into this. I'm 31. And so the name came about around 15 or so years ago. I wrote my first song in seventh grade. And I was thinking, okay, so I need to have a name change. And at this point, it was really spiritual for me. And then I was like, okay, I was reading the word of God. I'm a Christian by faith. And so I'm looking at it and I'm like, so I feel within me that there's some sort of transition, right? And I mean, reality is biologically, I'm a teenager, I'm going crazy. Like, just there's a lot of things going on. And of course, there's science to that. Our brains are becoming efficient, all of those kind of things. A lot of things are happening, right? But at that time, I'm kind of going through this process, and I'm like, there was a character in the Bible, who was named to Israel. And so the experience of that transition and even having to fight for that divinity, though the pathway of Jacob was really one that was a trickster, and not that I identified in that regard, but it was certainly one that was very human, right? And so I saw my humanity clearly. I grew up in a way that was very humble. And so in many ways, that part I didn't have to learn hard, right? Like it was something I experienced. But when it came to the transition, especially as I started writing music and getting into that inspiration, I'm like, Israel, that's a really, really, really dope name. I really feel that. I really feel it resonated with me. But there was already an Israel Houghton, I think it's how you pronounce his name. And so when I was thinking about that, I was like, okay, I want to get into the industry. I want to sing. That's all I really want to do, at that time. It's all I want to do. So I was like, I have to think of another name. And I was literally just thinking, okay, so if not Israel, then what would it be? And I was like, well, just real, because all I want to do is be me anyways. It's a transition that I'm experiencing, but I want to be just me. And so that's how Just Real came about. The two L's are very hilarious because uh, back in AOL days, just one of those L's didn't work. It wouldn't
Oh,
register as a name.
okay, because somebody might have already had it or
Somebody
something.
already had it.
Man,
Yep,
yeah, I don't
yep,
even. I'm not
absolutely.
even gonna share what my like aim, like screen name or any of that stuff. Like the older ones that I had, like definitely not as cool as that. Were there any other names that you considered besides Just Real?
It really wasn't, honestly, because
You
I
just
really
knew it was
wanted to
that.
just. I knew it was that, and I would have put a, kind of like a. I would have separated just and real to kind of, spell that out. But I began to think about it. Like it's not odd to see that word. Like well has two L's. Why does it have two L's? Who knows? But it was just became a different thing. And even for a small period of time, it was the craziest thing. I would literally spell everything that had an L with two L's. Wow. It didn't pass. It didn't go past like junior year high school. Let's just be honest. But I mean, hey, it was a thing.
But I mean, and we could do a whole stream on language, right, and how it evolves and changes and stuff like that. And sometimes it's just because somebody, literally like they didn't have the internet, but I bet if they did like long before us, that it would, words would look even crazier and have a lot more numbers in them now than I think going forward,
Right.
there's going to be a lot of that. Thanks, Elon Musk, for really setting the bar for how you name children. I guess going into going into the future. No, but you talked about
Nomenclature
yeah.
all day.
There you go. And you talked about your upbringing a bit, which was in Columbus proper, or was it like around Columbus? Like where you're from there, but I know about Nashville a bit, and I want to learn some more about your experience here. But I'd love to know more about Columbus and your upbringing there.
Absolutely. Oh man, you are asking some really, really interesting questions, particularly as it relates to the process. I'll tell you why. Because I'm not from Columbus necessarily. I'm from Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
And Dayton, Ohio is about a good hour 15, depending on how you're driving, west of Columbus. And it was just interesting because the climate was very different. It was not a lot of opportunities for young people, no less African American youth, black males, to really prosper and find their way, in many avenues, at least not in my purview and how I kind of came up. And so coming to Columbus was very interesting. My mom took an opportunity, and it was wild because I literally had an experience just through transitional moments and just a little instability financially and those kinds of things in a single parent household. I went to 12 different schools before I got to high school. And so Columbus is a life save for me because my mom found a great job there after we had spent some time just having some real interesting experiences. And I look to talk more about that hopefully in another writing one day, just to kind of give that experience, as people perhaps find more interest in my story and what I do. But so she took a job to Columbus when I was around middle school or so, and it changed my life. Changed my life. It was the first time that I saw young people involved in the city. They had a Columbus Youth Commission that allowed young people as early as 13 to 21 to be able to engage leadership of the city and make change. What they were seeing actually happen on the ground level at their high schools, and in some instances, their middle schools. And it was just really, really good to be able to see that. That was a time where I cut my teeth, really getting interested in music. I sort of always had that interest, even dealing with my aunt who sang. She sang two songs to me really very, very early on. Songwriter, and I didn't really even know the impact that would have on my life back at 5 and 6 years old. And so sang my first solo, all of that, fast forward, so I'm in that situation. And it's just crazy because now Columbus is just pouring out so much. I had the opportunity to attend an alternative school for high school, which was a magnet school. And so the schools in Columbus, Ohio, if they're alternative, they're magnet, which is interesting because most everywhere else that tends to be the complete opposite. And so and it was weird because I didn't have to be funneled into like a feeder sort of situation. You literally go into the lottery, and if you're chosen through the lottery, you get a chance to attend that school freshman year. And if you do well and persist through the rigor, then blah, 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 you do. It's a public school straight up in the inner city kind of thing. And it was a wonderful experience. And so Columbus Alternative Cause, IB Magnet, changed my life single handedly. That was the first institution that I went to where I started and then I finished fully. I could not have gotten any more out of that institution. As it contrasted to my past experiences and the volatility of those moments for me. And so Columbus Alternative was a great opportunity, being involved in Alpha Esquires, a lot of youth developmental organizations was really pivotal. I also was involved in Fort Hayes vocational music program, which is really cool too, because I got a chance to learn a little bit of theory and to really get pushed into what this whole business and really Jeff McCargish, who really leads that program, and I'm not sure if he's still in it now, but he's a goat, he's a legend, guitarist, and just all around, he really put me on the game of DIY and what that means. Had no clue that it would be something that would carry the work that I do even to this day at the university. And so Columbus, Ohio was a big start for me. It was a moment to sort of put on my big boy undies, and make it happen. I couldn't.
Yeah.
This is the first time I had to experience something that intense, and I mean, literally, Columbus Alternative was a moment, and just coming from a kid in 8th grade, in my I'll say May month, so like around the end of that semester, getting ready to go and transition into high school, I had the orientation. And like my humanities teachers, team taught both humanities was English as well as history. Got us together, all of the incoming freshmen. Hi, welcome. Nice to meet you. I see somebody said Columbus in the house. Love it. Said, hi, nice to meet you. This is our number. You can contact us, cell phone numbers, we'd love to have you here. You're going to have a great time. We have high expectations. I'm like, okay, cool. This sounds like it's going to be a great school. Wonderful. It's going to be, you'll read 3 books and you'll type up a 27-page paper that'll be due on the first day of class. No excuses.
And this was right out of high school or going in?
Right. Going into high school.
I was going to say, like, to me, that sounds like something that somebody would be doing, like leaving high school or something, and you were going in and doing that. But maybe school is just changing a bunch. But I mean, I guess from there, what did you end up doing? Like, did that challenge overwhelm you, or was it just you wanted to be a part of it, so you just dove in?
I really didn't know much about it, to be honest. I had mentors who, when I had moved to Columbus, I had my idea set on what I was going to go, and I was going to be zoned, into somebody said 27-page paper. No, yeah, it was intense. I said that too. But when I was going to be zoned to my school, it was amazing because I was like, okay, this is really where I want to go. And my mom was like, well, this is, where he wants to go. Her friend, who happens to be a mover and a shaker in the city, T Street, basically, she's amazing, and she does a lot of stuff rather nationally, and travels with her motivational speaking and all of that. She says, so whenever he becomes older than you, then he can make decisions. Otherwise, we're going to get him into Kai's. And I'm like, oh, I didn't mind it because I don't mind a challenge. I thrive in a challenge. I'm slicker procrastinator, but that energy pushes me and fuels me to be able to get a lot of work done. And I can find myself in a moment of flow where I'm just really engaged and and I lose track of time. And I mean, I'm tweaking the details. So I really find that to work for me, but it was a huge transition for me and for many colleagues coming in, because you came in from everywhere. Some came in from private schools, some came in from, schools that weren't as well performing, some came in even from out of, the city or out of the state because they had heard of, the school. And so again, it was just a school that really sought to transform the experience for normal students. And so that humanities really got me together. I'll tell you the truth. I got straight C's throughout all my humanities classes. What you got in humanities was served for English and history. But I got A's in everything else, just because I really engaged the process. I really said that every teacher at Columbus Alternative really taught their subject as if it were an art. I mean, I don't care what it was, math, science. They engaged you. And so I took on, I bit onto it. I learned my Spanish that way. I got engaged and learned more about this world that way. And then quite uniquely had the opportunity sort of as I was finishing out to experience vocational music over at Fort Hayes, which I love their model. Nashville has a certain similar model called the Academies model, which allows students to be able to sort of figure out what their appetite is for industry as early as I would say their middle school years. And so they get a chance to sort of figure that out, and then they can kind of go to whatever school suits their interest. Well, in Columbus, Ohio, no matter where your respective institution or your high school was, you could literally go to that vocational school. So I would have half a day at my at Kai's, my academic school, and then I would have the other half of the day at my vocational school. And that was groundbreaking. I mean, I got a chance to do a little bit of writing, to figure out my voice more, and more importantly, and really this is the key, to be around people who are more amazing than me, to really be able to see their creative processes and just how they go about music, what they're listening to. All of it is data. That support, an opportunity to figure out that I actually really want to do this. And so I was like, I don't really want to know what I want to study. Ended up going, moving here to Nashville to go to Fisk University to study music business because I knew I wanted to sing.
But did you always know that you wanted to go to Fisk? Like, at what point did that come up in the school before? Because I feel like a lot of times, at some point in high school, people start talking about like that possibility or like where they might want to go after that, or like teachers start bringing it up. Some people like know from when because their family went, or like they were like they've literally always known they were going to go to that school. Like, I'm curious to know, like, when did Fisk become a conversation for you? And for those of you who are on here that might not know Fisk University, it's in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a historically Black college. It's like one of the like main like staples as far as like HBCUs go, right? Like
Absolutely.
So I guess when did that play into like your plan as to when you were going to that school?
It was very
besides wanting to sing.
Right. And it was wild because it takes me actually back to the motto of Columbus Alternative, which was wild because on Wednesdays we would have internship where you just wouldn't come to class. Now, as a freshman, you would have to come to class anyways. It was your freshman seminar. But on those Wednesdays, you wouldn't come. You would implant somewhere into the community. So you would just basically serve as an administrative assistant or whatever the case may be as you could find. And the internship coordinator would really coordinate those and build those relationships between those third party businesses. And so my first gig was, quite interestingly enough, was teaching elementary school, 4th grade. I didn't want that, but it was an opportunity to kind of take a look at that. The ones that came after were working for representatives. And so I worked for Representative Joyce Beatty at the time, and then Representative Sylvester Patton. And it was interesting because I didn't know anything about Fisk, but as I was getting into it and my mom was being more apprised of opportunities for me to, join Upward Bound and those kinds of things, I had an opportunity to do a college tour, like a Southern tour, HBCU tour. And so we did that. Fisk stood out to me the most because it was just this one school on an acre. I mean, it was very tiny. The buildings looked like they needed a major update. Where am I driving through? Because most HBCUs, let's just put it where it is. They're in the hood or they're sort of in obscurity. It's really often that you'll find that. However, obviously the gem of the institution and what it represents and all of those kinds of things. And so kind of coming into it, I was just like, this is a little, let's take a look and see. So I wasn't completely turned off at the very beginning, where some of my colleagues were. And I'm gonna go back to the representative conversation as that ties in. But as I'm going there, one of the biggest things that stood out to me was the fact that they were just so welcoming. I had sort of known a little bit about the school because I was entertaining conversations with Representative Joyce Beatty, and I was telling her, I was like, I think I'm really interested in, going to Fisk University. And she's like, well, that's a wonderful school. You should really consider it, and I'm like, I had never even heard of Fisk, no less the Jubilee Singers. And so to hear somebody in her, because I had the opportunity, I had to show up and I had to work. Otherwise, I wouldn't be invited in that space. To hear somebody like that affirm that university, I'm like, oh, wow. And I hadn't really traveled much beyond that point as a young person. And so I was like, this is really interesting. Okay, I'll think about it. But the other thing is I had an opportunity to also do some summer work, sort of similar to what they do here for the students in Nashville, where that same partnership exists with the institutions or the businesses and then the schools. And so I had an opportunity to work for UNCF. And in doing so, just kind of pushing out, opportunities for scholarships for other students and helping whatever I had to do. And so I'm learning more about the member institutions, Fisk being one of them, and learned that they had a music business program. I'm like, this is interesting because I tried my little voice out in the 10th grade and I was so nervous and shy, and I gave it a try out and in the talent show, and so that kind of bit me. People were interested, and of course I had high school voice. Don't knock it, but it's high school voice, And but it was
Fundamentals,
something that
man.
stood out.
There's something to talk
Fundamentals.
about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was just that beginning. You're cutting your teeth, you're finding your voice, you're finding that consistency, your sound, all of those kind of things. So that really bit me. And so I'm looking for schools, and I'm like, okay. So I'm hearing Joyce Beatty in my ear tell me this is a wonderful school. I'm looking it up because I work for UNCF at this time as well over the summer, and I'm getting ready to finish out at Kai's. And so I'm like, there's something about this university. The only thing that I hadn't had a chance to do, as I already sort of leaned in and told us, was had that tour. And so I'm looking at this university, and three things stood out to me. I said, they have a music business program. That's odd, especially for the HBCUs, the historically Black colleges or universities. So I was like, I know I want that experience to be a part of me. I want to be able to go where I feel like my identity is celebrated in mass, and not in exclusivity, but certainly in a way that I would have never had otherwise.
Yeah,
And
because
so
you're
Fisk
you're
was
you're
that.
not just music. You're not just your interest in singing. Like there's all of these aspects of you, and I feel like I mean everything you're saying. Like even I would be like, yeah, Fisk sounds like a really great option considering all of the stuff that you're trying to like make sure that like all of you is represented, not only in just comfort levels in general, but also like just what you're learning and being able to like really grow and challenge yourself.
No, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, it's the most fundamental piece for me because you only get that for 4 years. And what I was told early on by awesome mentors is, that's some of the best times of your life if you do it right. And I'm already going through hell at Kai's, with only 4 classes a semester kind of thing, but with 3 or 4 hours of homework, no cap, at night. So I'm
Oof.
tripping, like I'm ready to get out of here. And I'm doing okay. I graduated decently. My ACT scores were much higher than my GPA, and so it didn't really equate. But they didn't also give us any love with the difference on how they treated us. I still love Columbus Alternative nonetheless. But Fisk met me just right there. It met me as a whole person, and that was the thing that I anticipated. But it honestly was an under promise and an over delivery. The other thing that kind of grabbed me though was that Fisk was a part of this weird industry of music called Music City. What is Nashville? Had
Yeah.
never been, right? Didn't know much about it at all. But I'm like, I just know I hear a lot of people talk about it. And so I had begun to think about things that were important. I said, and this really begun to inform my conversations that I would have with, students that would come, who would be interested in the music business program. And that's another conversation too to have because of my current role now. But I would just simply say, when you're looking at a university or an institution, you want to think about the programs that they have, not just the name. Yes, Fisk is a top-rated private HBCU, and so that was a good thing. I wanted that experience, and it was a blessing to be able to have. They gave me the least amount of money, but I still I still went there. So that sort of the name that the institution carries, and then the efficacy, if you will, or even the strength or the reputation of the programs. Yeah, you can go to an institution that has a name, but the programs could be trash.
Yep.
Doesn't really do you any good. So I knew that was something that I wanted to explore. And having a music business consortium with Belmont, didn't know much about Belmont, but I'm like, that could be interesting. I sort of could figure out getting the best of both institutions for the price of one. I'm headed for it, right? The other thing was just that, like just as you said, that personal connection. And so when I made that tour, and even though it was just that one school that was just unappealing to most of my colleagues, I knew
Mm-hmm.
everybody was so welcoming there. The admissions counselor treated me as if I were a name, not a number. Gave me his number, in fact, and said, "Call me if you all have any questions." And I'm like, "You don't even know us," and was just that personal. And I mean, I'm from Ohio. I'm decently up north, and so that Southern hospitality wasn't something that really bit me early on, but it seemed like Fisk embodied that, and that's where I really wanted to be. I can be extroverted, but I really am kind of introverted anyways. And having that small knit community and that family
Yeah.
really resonated with me. And so yeah, Fisk. It was crazy because I didn't even know about the Jubilee Singers,
Well, and
and
that's
Fisk was
and
already.
that's the next thing that I was going to say. I mean, Jubilee Singers, yes. Jefferson Street being like just a few blocks away. That's a whole nother. Like we could have a whole conversation about the history of Jefferson Street and its importance and impact on not only Nashville but the world. Same thing with Jubilee singers. Like for anybody who's on here that doesn't know, like you might think country music when you think of Music City, but it's Fisk Jubilee Singers that gave that name, being a world-renowned touring act, and it was really the like it is often credited with being the ones that like brought that name to like you must be from City of Music, right? Like with and so I was going to ask you about like because that could be a whole other thing. We're going to settle with just asking about your experience being in Fisk Jubilee and going from high school choir to really having to go to a whole other level where like those are some big shoes to fill. How did that go for you?
It was extremely, extremely interesting, Chris. Well, I got kicked out of high school choir.
Wait, what happened? When you said because your voice just ended up cutting out, or what was it?
This guy cut out. I just never made the performances. It never occurred to me that you just can't show up and sing really well, you know. and I'm saying really well as in to say that like it wasn't a surprise that I was okay. I wasn't exceptional. I would say like I wasn't the one who everybody called to do the solos between classes or whatever. But everybody knew I could sing, and they would ask me to sing anyways. I mean, I did pretty much sing often whenever I was asked, but I didn't show up to the performances, and I wish that things were different. I wish that it was more prioritized and all of those wonderful things. But the reality was, you know, my choir director straight up told me, she says, "Hey, love you, mean it, can't have you. You're a liability." I said, "I understand, I get it."
Because you got
And
to show
so
up.
making that transition, yeah, I have to show up, and that's just the thing. Yeah, you can be there, but you whatever value you add, if it's not there when it needs to be there, as I'm learning in hindsight, right? Like it doesn't matter what you've done. As a matter of fact, it detracts because now I'm expecting that sound in the ongoing or whatever the case may be, the input, the energy, the whatever the case may be. And so I didn't have that chance. But moving into Fisk was really interesting because I'm learning about the Jubilee Singers. I'm like,
And
wow, like they were
before you go
actually.
into it, can you tell everybody on here who might not know what the Fisk Jubilee Singers are? Like, could you give a quick explanation that only you between the two of us you would understand even better than I do, even though I have such an appreciation for it.
No, absolutely. It's an honorable experience, and I honestly just represent. And I'll say this all the time: a fraction of a percent of the legacy of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Having toured for over 140 plus years, continually internationally, I consider them the first and probably one of the longest lasting international pop groups that we have. And so Fisk Jubilee Singers are just a group of Fisk students that learn to sing classical art music. So they were trained to sing art music. And that's what they did. However, of course, according to the heritage, and the reason that they did this was because the treasurer at the time used them to basically save the school, to be able to put on performances so that monies could be made to help save the school. School started out as a normal college that was, used to teach literacy. And so you had students as young as perhaps in their teens, as late as, 5, 6,
It's
7
wild.
decades, right? And so you had just a huge number of students who became, who were educated in these army barracks at the time. And so having that experience, with the American Missionary Association and just the work that they did to institute this school, they just needed funds. They really needed funds. It was a promising school, and the truth is, they always had that in the early 20th century. Even it sort of was like the black Harlem, if you will, of the South. Even in some instances, the Harvard of the South. A lot of intellectual thought had come through, and of course it still is to this day. But the Jubilee Singers really are pivotal in that because that monies that they used to travel saved and really built the institution. And some argue that the monies used were used to build the Jubilee Hall, which is a national historical place that you can kind of take a look at if you want to see it. But that building was for the sole purpose of educating African Americans. And so it could have been the first building in the nation. It certainly was the first in this region, being the first college in this area. of Tennessee. And that was really cool to know too, because they got that money when they went on their second tour, working and singing for the Queen of England. And so she said, "Where you come must be an area of music." And so it was sort of that conversation. There was a painting done on them, an official painting done, that was an incredible experience. And it was just, again, they were just singers. Now, the crazy part about it is the art songs, right? So they're trained to sing classically. That's how you sort of see the hybrid of the quartet and the gospel sort of coming into play with this American twist of taking, the European classics. It's because we already had that instilled, but then there's this soul of the Negro spiritual that comes out. And so the mother of the group, Ella Shepherd, who understood how to play chords, began to basically chart out music that was very near to them in terms of their understanding of slave life. And so songs like Steal Away began to come forward and be sung in the open space. And it was quite ironic because many times they had to perform on a balcony. But when they began to sing, and it's written in a text, I forgot the time, I think it's Dark Midnight When I Rise, I have it somewhere around here. But the text describes, I think it's by Andrew Ward, as a matter of fact, the writer, that when they were at a missionary, I believe, convocation or some sort of event in Oberlin, Ohio, they began to just sing the art songs, and the missionaries were sort of going about the bustle of the day, and then they broke out and Steal Away. Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. And so they began to sing that song. And as they broke out in the harmony, right, it's such a beautiful, everything happened, right? Even the text declares that as they began singing that song, sort of the hustle and bustle stopped. And then the clouds broke, and then the sun came out, right? And so it's just sort of this defining moment that the Jubilee Singers have more to offer than just the art song. They have their song sung in this intelligible way, where in the time, people expected a Black audience to do minstrel. And so it was just kind of interesting to see them singing what was perceived as intelligent music in a way that was very, very radical and unique. And it took the world by storm.
And I've always been fascinated by how gospel I guess the church's role, especially in the Black experience in general, especially when it comes to music, how much innovation comes from Black music, and that everything that you had just said, because the minstrel thing, it's sort of it was the top 40 at the time, right? And so a lot of people were having to participate and do that to make money. Even people who didn't appreciate it as an art form, but knew that if they were going to make money, that they had to play ball or whatever. They've said
they were doing this business.
Yeah, 100%. So to go and do what you just said, it can't be understated how radical of a thing that is, and to have that. To have that be the impression that somebody gets on the other side of it, where it's not the expectation isn't oh, you didn't do that, but you did this. And so, but I just think that's incredible. And I know that we're skipping around a little bit, but I feel like this is super interesting to me, especially, knowing the schools that you went to growing up, and the fact that you ended up teaching in Metro Nashville public school system for 8+ years. So, in fact, I'm pretty positive the first time we met for real was in one of your classes, and
it sure was.
And I just wanted to was it your upbringing? Was it your experience at Fisk? What was it that made you want to go into the public school system in general? I know you didn't see yourself doing the elementary thing. It seemed like you really wanted to have an impact at the level that you were having an impact at. I'm just curious, what your thought process was, going from singing in your school and then to graduating to working in the school system.
Man, I appreciate. First off, I'm blown away by these questions, man. Because they mean a lot to me. It's a part of my story I don't get to share often, but it's just really interesting. Because now, right, I'm a teacher, and I never saw that coming. It's odd because I mean, whenever I was in class, anyways, if ever I learned something new and it excited me for whatever reason, I just wanted to share it with somebody. So if there's somebody who wanted to listen, right? Like we engaged authentically in that moment. But I mean, I promise it never was a thing to me that was just like, oh, I should pursue this. Never. As a matter of fact, growing up, my mom was like, I make more money than teachers as a customer service rep and the work that she had done, and not having,
She
the
used that
degrees to
as
really
the
support.
bar. She'd be like, I make more than the teacher. That was like her thing growing up. I guess that's for some that's a common thing. It's like people know
It,
that, but and but again, it can't be understated like how much of an effect it has. So like when you, I guess so, would you say you fell into it, or like at what point did you like really like start digging your heels in and being like, I'm gonna like make this like my way?
Jump into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy because just that. I mean, it was a conversation that I had heard from a lot of people. Like teaching. You want to get into teaching? No less elementary school. That's how I started, and I didn't see it coming, bro. Like I did not see it coming. I was trying to figure out what life was going to look like after graduation. Again, I'm coming into Fisk only wanting to sing, so I was going to study music business so that nobody would cheat me out of my money. I just had this fanciful idea, like that's how it worked. I'm going to go out there, and if I study really hard, that's going to make me successful. It was just crazy. Like there's so much more to this world of work that you've got to put in, right? And so having come into that experience, I'm like, okay, but what? I really want to enjoy a certain level of consistency that I didn't have as a kid. So I want to, I want to be able to do something other than like, kind of the stereotypical, like I'm gonna play guitar by night, wash a dish or two by day kind of thing, because I get it and I don't knock it. I don't knock it. Whenever musicians have the ability to pull work from wherever they're doing it, and they can do it in a way that doesn't tax them or require them to expel so much energy so they can be creative, there's so much respect for that. I think it's an
Yeah.
understated conversation, but there's a lot of respect for it. I just couldn't do it for myself because I needed just a little bit more than, again, what I was used to seeing. And so Teach for America came up on the scene, and I know it's weird because there's some controversy there, but I enjoyed just the preparation. I enjoyed the heart for wanting to give you all of the tools so that you can show up for your kids. And that's really what I did. I took that opportunity. I was recruited, I think, my junior or senior year in college. And I was like, okay, I can do this for 2 years. This is a 2 year, it's basically like the military or AmeriCorps, 2 year, you pay back your country kind of thing. And, and I think that that's important. Other countries have that motto in a sense where
Yeah.
it's like there's mandated work that you must do to pay it forward before you get into a career. I respect it. But it was just an opportunity for me to take a look at. Coming from a business background, I was only qualified to teach elementary school because I didn't have substantial coursework in like any of the core subjects, so math, history, any of that. I had specialized, nobody's going to necessarily need accounting or marketing or copyright law, but and so I made that transition and I kind of bit the bullet. I said, okay, God, I just want to sing, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to teach, and I'm excited about it because I get a chance to reflect who I was. And it
Yeah.
was interesting going back into fourth grade, which was my assignment for 2 years. It was wild. I got a chance to be with them. First charter school in Nashville. And it was, I say probably over 90% uh, free reduced, so low socioeconomic background. Students looked just like me, came from my background. And it was just interesting because I was homeless in fourth grade. And so I got a chance to be who I never had to my babies. And that was so inspiring. I'm like, okay, so
Man.
what's going on? Like, and so I did that, but I tell you what, I had to get out immediately. Like I loved the 2 years there, but it was time to go because, you know, the babies were great. I needed them. And I ended up getting into my master's work at that time too, which was great because I was able to understand sort of the building blocks of learning. How do you learn literacy from understanding symbols? Like kids learn symbols. They see McDonald's sign and they build meaning and to that. And then we begin to learn language and they say eat. They don't say I want to eat because they don't know that language. What's most urgent is eat, right? And so those kinds of things I began to build as a scholar, so to speak, instructional practice in my master's program. And so that was happening all at the same time, and Teach for America was going on, and it was just a lot. But
Man.
I knew at that point that it was probably time. I knew that I enjoyed this gig of education, but at this point, it's probably time to move on, higher. Who knew that? And it was wild because as I was starting my locks around '08, I got out of college in 2011. As I was starting my locks and they were just this small, I was telling my loctician, like, there's this school, I guess down the street is this high school. It's like this entertainment school. I'm gonna teach there one day. Had no clue that that would even be a thing. It was just a casual, ha conversation. Ended up being the school that I did 6 years at, which was Pearl Cone Entertainment Magnet High School. And so a lot of people sort of knew that I was interested in music business, even though I was Teach for America, and they knew that I would sing. And so they was like, there's a great school over right in the heart of North Nashville. And if you don't know much about North Nashville, it's so special, down to the music, down to the Black opulence, and even down to just the unfortunate experiences that they've had with mass incarceration. There's some data that show that that zip code is the most incarcerated zip code in the nation, and in many ways you can see its impacts even with the young people, because they all sort of built community with each other. They all know each other. They lean on each other. But you can tell that there's some opportunities there that are missing. And so it was great because, again, it was like being right back at home. I'm sheltered at Fisk for 4 years. It's sort of this microcosm. But again, as I told you, most of these HBCUs and how they're set up, Fisk is not even a 5 minute walk. Or rather, Pearl Cone is not even a 5 minute walk from Fisk. And so being able to go to Pearl Cone to teach in this brand new music business program with this amazing principal named Dr. Sonia Stewart, and all of the wonderful stuff she's doing in social emotional learning, and all of those wonderful things was great because I got a chance to cut my teeth in the content that I do. The focus for me didn't really seem to be really heavily music industry focused, more than it seemed to be whole child focused. And I understand leadership. That's what it was about. I respect Stewart's vision and her work. And so from that experience, though, I had opportunities to connect with amazing partners like you, and just so many people through our partnership, right? Because we were the only entertainment magnet school, as far as I was aware of, in the nation that had a student-run record label. No, I didn't manage that. I was a student of some of the leadership there, namely Cedric Caldwell, who's done a lot of work in industry. And so it was just a really unique opportunity to transition from elementary school. And I had to do a middle school practicum of 30 hours to be able to transition that way. But as soon as I had done that, effectively giving me the opportunity to touch kids from kindergarten on up to 12 and even college, which is awesome. Because again, having an experience in high school to be able to teach that was another opportunity for me of grace, because that's when I was most transformed, right? Having been in 12 different schools, before coming to high school, and then just being like so amazed by how the teachers engaged in their work and loved and engaged us and yet pushed us. I got a chance to be that to my kids for 6 years in my content. And it was just crazy. Who's teaching music business in 10th grade? Who's learning that?
Oh, 100%.
And so, I got a chance to, in many ways, make some mistakes, right? And I got a chance to do a lot of innovation that nobody got a chance to see, really. And it was really cool because I prepared my students so that when they got to a Cedric Caldwell in their upper level grades, they were doing projects that everybody got a chance to see, Let There Be Voice and Sing, and all of those kinds of things. And so I didn't get a chance to work specifically on that project. Cedric did. That's the kind of work that the students would do. But Pearl Cone Entertainment Magnet was a special place for the time I was there, and so enhanced, man. I tell you, when you all would come in and just interact with us, my phone was out. I'm literally transitioning to student mode, taking notes.
No, and I loved how you tied everything that the guests were saying, because I wasn't the only guest in the room that day, but I loved that you were able to kind of tie everything that was being talked about in that forum to like helping students understand that, like, yeah, there might be things in your life that you're interested in, but again, the fundamentals and the things that they're learning, like right now, apply, and they might not see it yet, but here's an example of how this thing I taught you last week, and like I remembered you would be like, hey, you remember when I told you about this? Like, this is what leads to that, and then that, and it was really cool to see those like dots connect, and it's funny because I guess, as somebody who's not a teacher, but I'm fascinated by the idea of it, and like I love talking to people who have experience in teaching, because I just have this mode that like I just walk around. I'm like, oh yeah, everybody has the internet, so like I am just gonna say stuff and just assume that And that's a completely wrong way to like move through life in general. It's like you're always learning and teaching, and it's like a never-ending cycle. But to have that skill and that gift to be able to have the patience and do it, I think it's so cool to see your experience that you've been able to turn into one that like you've been able to, like you said, be that teacher to you. And and I think like the school that you had talked about, and even Pearl Cone, like has similar struggles for as amazing of a school as that is. And
Absolutely. Sure.
but I was going to ask, like, I mean, because we're going to I want to get into talking about performance and your book and everything. So just real quick, or feel free to stay on this as long as you want, because it's important for anybody who's watching right now that wants to support a local school in some kind of way, or students or anything like that. Like, are there any resources that you'd recommend, or anything that you would just say to pay attention to, whether you want to talk about just Nashville specifically or anywhere in the world or in the nation?
Absolutely, I would love to. I will say this. I will say when it comes to what you do well in industry, or I mean, you might be a professional in what you do, implant and see what's going on with your schools, because a lot of times they enjoy, particularly if it's not done systematically, it's at least done. It's some staff members going to manage that in the building where they want to connect students to post curricular, or rather post secondary opportunities. And so, if the work that you do is something that perhaps you could see needing some assistance in, or you want to open up an opportunity for some training, and you just want some a fresh opportunity to train and to really spend time with young people, or even to just see what's going on in these schools. Well, these days it's a little different because of COVID, but then again, there are opportunities for Zoom
Yeah.
and videos recording what you all do and giving that to universities and schools. I think it's a great opportunity to connect because they need to see it. Yes, we're involved in this work every single day, and Monday is a Monday is a Monday, but to a student, that's life changing. And that's the thing that I never take for granted, is that what I could be saying or iterating every single day just feels like, oh my goodness gracious. And I mean, even to what you said, Chris, I want to sort of mirror that. Is I get to a point where I'm talking to my students so often, but they see a fresh face like you come in and bring that content in, and it's just like, whoa, like, you see, we speak in the same language. And so it's those moments that I think we can take for granted until we have a fresh opportunity to engage in that. And so whatever you do, if you think that it is important work, uh, what are ways that you could expose it? What are ways that you could brand it, in a way that could serve, initiatives of your high schools, and of their career academies, of that kind of sort? I think that's an excellent opportunity. And then, of course, it gives you an opportunity to implant more in your community. How oftentimes do I go around, and of course, because I'm in, working with these young people and I see them, how, often do I go to a Kroger or wherever, and I'm still connecting with these same young people? Well, I think a lot of times our business partners get that opportunity too if they're local, because you're going to see these young people wherever you're shopping or doing business and working. And so being able to just implant and see what they've got going on, it'll give you an opportunity to just even see, just kind of see how different school was for you, however long you may or may not have been in school. And the kids need that. The kids need to see what you look like. They need to see that a professional may not necessarily dress up in a suit and tie, right? They need to see that you work from home even, or that you manage multiple companies, that you may not show up, on a 9 to 5 basis. Like, all of those things are novel to a young person who's been spending 12, I'll say even in a high school level, 9 to 12 years just relegated to a 9 to 5, really,
Yeah.
right? That's school for them. And so it's an opportunity to connect, and then no less the opportunity to say, hey, young people are amazing when it comes to how they navigate technology and how they communicate. And so leveraging that is an up in terms of this, the opportunity to really benefit from that. So a lot of sort of a roundabout conversation to say that we just simply need more engagement with our businesses in the community. These are the students who are coming to us, right? And we want to just be able to at least vet them.
Yeah, I love that. And also, it's like, like for me, as somebody who, like, up until, I don't know, I think it was Obama's second term, I wasn't really involved in politics until like wanting, for Obama to be in office for another 4 years, that was when I really started getting involved in politics and realizing but that was on the national level, then realizing on the state level, how important that can be when you're talking about budgets and how important voting can matter for the local
Facts.
school systems, especially for schools when there's a focus on arts. Because I feel like a lot of times, and I don't know if it was like this because of the nature of Pearl Cone, but even you had said, even though it was an entertainment magnet school, they weren't just purely focused on the entertainment aspect of it. Because you can't just focus on that, right? No
Facts.
matter what. So I just feel like that's super important to be involved in that capacity. So, and a reminder for anybody who's in here, we're obviously going back and forth talking a lot, but please feel free to share any questions, thoughts in the chats in real time. But now I want to move into talking about speaking of the 9 to 5 and everything. Where did you find the time between your schooling and your ability to teach others to perform and record vocals for all those artists? Which, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know, this guy's worked with Chris Tomlin, Chris Stapleton, Mavis Staples, Rival Sons. I love that they're slowly it's almost like the name is transforming. Rival Sons, Maren Morris, We the Kingdom, Kid Rock, Robert Randolph and the Family Band, Kaleo, Shannon, The Bill Sanders. So many awesome people. How do you find the time balancing all of that?
And I see that I want to get to Fading Ink in a second. I will certainly get to that because it's a great conversation. It goes back to Fisk.
Okay.
It's a blessing to be able to do that in my current role as a faculty fellow at Belmont University. And so I get a chance to do that, which is amazing because I'm teaching the same content just in another environment, a different level of engagement, a higher level of engagement. And so that's a great opportunity. But when I was working at Pearl Cone, I didn't really get a chance to do a lot of the acting work. And so some of the stuff that I do too, I'm in commercials, just very little commercials that you may see sort of around the nation through my acting work that I've done. And it's not a lot, but it's kind of, it's in this industry, as volatile as the entertainment industry is, it's kind of project specific for me, at least. Yeah. I'm not on, payroll when it comes to this kind of work. It's just a real matter of provide value, do your homework, seize the opportunity, be friendly, be, a pleasure to work with, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all wanting to connect. It's all genuine, and make the most of that moment. And so I think that's really been the opportunity. And it doesn't all happen just because of me, right? It happens because I have a chance to steward those, but I don't necessarily bring about those opportunities. Working with Shannon Sanders has been a big opportunity for me. Working with the Recording Academy has as well. And so, but they have been project specific, so on and off. When I was working at Pearl, I did miss some, because I couldn't take off with my students. I'd have to put in a day and grab a sub, and so I had to forego some of those opportunities. But when it came to night work, when it came to working even over the summer, weekends, I would absolutely take advantage of those opportunities. Seems like now my schedule is more free with respect to my requirements and expectations in terms of my teaching load. And so I'm able to do a little bit more when it comes to, just being able to do the practitioner side of this work. And so that's exciting. And then too, it's kind of, you get yourself in a position to where you work on one thing, and if it does well, then hopefully it gets a chance to kind of connect with other people, and then they want you on their project. And so that's really, the time is found in the joy of it, right? So if I got to put down a personal trip or whatever that I'm doing on the side for an opportunity that I probably won't get, I'm kind of built that way to take it. You know what I mean? I had an opportunity just this weekend, and I was going to, take a trip to go to DC, just to have a personal time. I don't get out much, and that was just going to be a moment for me. But then I get a phone call like, "Hey, you got some work." So I had it twice, I had two opportunities. And so I took it, and, and that's just kind of what you do. You make time for it. And I love that. So it's nice to be able to have the balance of, teaching, because that provides stability. It allows me to completely and immediately turn what I'm giving or what I'm getting from industry and what I'm doing and what I'm learning just from the production side, right? And then immediately turn that to value for my students. But then again, I can also then go and refresh that experience and just kind of be up to date on what's going on, and to be able to live in that moment and really meet some cool folks. And in my line of work, it's really nice because I'm kind of on the back end of it as a vocalist. Either I'm cutting demos or I'm actually cutting, work for actual artists' projects, which is really, which is really cool. But I don't have the burden of, the project, or the brand in many
Yeah.
ways, which, being an artist, man, you had to have a kill spirit. I love
And
20
we're
People in
and we're
Stardom because they cover it.
I was just gonna say that was the exact reference I was gonna use with like, because there were some artists who came from that, but some, for the most part, there's so many voices that people, you know, until they put a face to the name, like in a documentary like that they might not even know, like that's there. They just like it's an effect or something, but it's really just like it's this whole team effort that happens, and we're gonna talk about that. And before we get into the next section, because I want to start talking about your book, everybody wants to know about your artwork behind you.
Yes, yes. So I'm going to show you guys really fast. This, I hate to admit it, it's a replica. I had a colleague of mine who's a phenomenal visual artist do this painting for me. It's actually a painting of Fisk University. And it's wild because if you can kind of see, sort of on this side is the library here. And then you have Jubilee Hall, which is literally right here, that building that was built for around 50,000. I think in today's time, it's probably 3 or 4 times that amount. And that was the first building solely erected for the sole purpose of educating African Americans. We call it frozen music because of the Jubilee Singers. Ironically enough, they didn't make a lot of money doing what they did, and they were sick and traveling. So it was a hard experience. They were some soldiers for real. They really blazed the path for us. And then so just campus, right? This just one block of campus, and then you have a graduate here, just kind of really with all of his ancestors sort of kind of standing on their shoulders, right? So you got graduates here who represent, I believe, the centennial graduation of Fisk University. It was founded in 1866. This would have been 1966 there. And then you have some of Aaron Douglas's artwork influence, who was a student, a teacher at Fisk University, started the art department at Fisk University. So many people don't know about that influence. That's Aaron Douglas. And you may see some of that if you looked at Princess and the Frog. You saw some of those shadow art. So that's his art. So when you brought that up, I was like, I definitely got to get back to that because it's breathtaking. I feel honored to have it. I don't even know why I have it, but I mean, I know why, because it's a blessing that, a colleague of mine really thought enough of me on my 21st to do that. But yeah, it represents a school that changed my life.
No, I mean, I was gonna say
Absolutely.
it's funny. You're like I don't know why I have it. I was like, I feel like I know now, and I feel like everyone on here, and maybe you talking through it, and you're like, oh, maybe that does make sense. But I want to talk about your book that I bought and that I'm still reading through, because there's a lot of great info in there. Honestly, I haven't been able to get through. I haven't gotten through the whole production part yet, and then going into the business part of it, but. I feel like I was able to get through enough to ask you the questions that I want to ask you here, and then I'm sure I'll have plenty more questions to ask you offline at some point. But I like that it's made up of collections of mini lessons, and that it's sort of broken out from, after you get through the introduction, into 2 parts of, like, you're talking about, you're sort of putting things under 2 like buckets of, like, there's production and then there's the business side of it. And so that way, like, I like it because you can kind of read it from top to bottom, or you could sort of like refer back to a thing. So I was like, okay, well, clearly somebody who's taught like knows what they're doing here, because like to me like that's so invaluable as like somebody who, like, I'll like pick up a book and then sometimes I might step away from it to be able to like come back to it and start where I'm like, okay, I need to refresh myself on this, or even finish a book and be able to come back but not read the whole thing. Like, I love that it's broken out that way. But before diving into both sections, I wanted to know, like, what made you want to make this book in the first place? Like, between teaching and singing on like Grammy award winning artist stuff and doing your own stuff, like how like what was in your mind that's like, I could write a book, like, Like, what made you be like, I should just do that?
It's so hilarious. I'm kind of one of those when I got a wild hair, right? I pluck it and just go with it. And so I had a lot of energy towards it. And I just wanted to get it out. The reality is the book. It's called, as we know, Creative Innovation, and I'm using it for a course that I'm piloting in the spring at Belmont called the DIY Creative. And so it's really around this conversation of creative efficacy, being just kind of what you said about like the orientation that Google is out there, right? Like Howard Gardner said, we're in an age of information. There are five minds that we need. One of those minds is synthesis. Why? Because there's so much information already out there. So to the extent where we can actually take that, own it, and begin to funnel that information and make it presentable and marketable, like that's a key, right? And so that book for me was an answer to many, or really just a collective answer to many questions that I had in my own development and my own artistry. I got into songwriting, so to speak, testing it. I only have one song that I put out that I published because I didn't really fancy the artist game so much in the new era, right? But I certainly think that consulting wise, I have a lot to offer, and that's why I do what I do, and I think there's utility there. But as I was going into it, it was just wild because I didn't have that. So I'm going into Fisk learning to sing, right? But they didn't have a commercial music program. It was a classical music program. And so I'm being trained to sing open throat technique, bel canto style, and my voice is changing. Now I came into it with a little tension in the jaw, and I'm trying to do my singing that's a little different, right? But again, high school singing, it's all I know. I'm kind of mimicking at that time. But all of these thoughts are sort of coming to me like, well, if there's a way that I could systemize this, then I'll be able to get it a lot sooner. What I know is that's research. It's completely research based. Bloom's taxonomy suggests that the lowest level of learning is remembering. Highest level of learning is creation. And so to the extent where I can apply that, systemize it, then I know that I'll never forget it. That's the whole thing. I don't want to learn something that's boring, or I don't want to learn something that's so laborious that I'm not going to remember it. I want to remember it. And so going through Fisk, having those experiences, I'm like, okay, so I get how to keep my voice healthy, right? Like I understand the support, the technique makes sense, but it's not, I don't sound like bro on track, like, on top 40. And that's the goal. Like I want to be able to sound, I've always wanted to sound like who I was listening to. I never considered myself in, not necessarily in competition, but I never considered myself in the same category, or at least in the same challenge of camaraderie with colleagues that sang around me, even though some were better, some were not. You know what I mean? It just was a matter of what it was. In this industry, you got to know where you are. You got to accept failure, call it what it is, take success, but don't dwell in and move forward to the next thing, right? But like I didn't really understand that process, and so um, kind of singing and going through that, I'm like, okay, so there's a bridge that has to happen. So there's technique, but then there's also a way that you sing. And through mimicking that and through thinking about that metacognition, right? That reflecting about my thinking, kind of going through that process, I'm like, there's some things here that I really want to do. And I would have a lot of conversations even as early as freshman year with my colleague, Jordan Holland, who wrote two lessons actually in 50 of those mini lessons that I have. And so I'm like, these are things that I think about. And I wasn't a music major. I just maximized on the opportunity. We had a phenomenal vocal teacher, Val Boombalis, who was there for 40 years, trained us all just how to keep our voices healthy. And, so it was amazing because that funneled into the work we did as Jubilee singers and all of that. But again, I'm the music business or the business administration major, concentrating in music business with all of these music majors singing classically. I'm like, that's not my gig. I want to get out there and sing neo soul. That's what I do. I want to sing gospel. I want to sing, and I knew I had the voice for it, but I localized that as early as high school and had left it because now again, different sound. I'm singing 40, 50 song repertoire, a repertoire of Jubilee music that's completely classical, classically sung. And then, not doing much of my own kind of singing at the time too, right? So all of those things I'm trying to figure out. I'm looking online. I'm doing exactly what we talked about. Like I'm exploiting Google, YouTube, how do I approach the singing this way? And how do I get my voice to do this? And just how do I keep it healthy? And how do I, so I'm trying to figure all of those things out. Because I studied music business right through my the music business program of the consortium that Fisk and Belmont had, that already put me on game in terms of understanding that as an artist, I better learn the business. Again, in a state of naivete, I'm thinking, I'm just going to be a singer who's just going, have people that will work for me, want to work for me. Like that's how it works. You got to be compelling. You got to have a brand. You got to fail a little bit. Then you've got to build steam and have some data, all of it. But I'm like, okay, I want to be able to not be ripped from my money. All of that is good.
Oh,
But when you go into this industry now, you've got to be all of that first. And if not, you've got to teach people who are there for you, but who don't understand the industry, right? To be able to do that. And so I'm like, this is exhausting. If my marketing budget, for instance, needs to be at least 6 to 8 times what I'm doing in production, first of all, I just dropped a stack on my only song that I put out. I ain't making money like that. So it's not like I can replicate this process. This is really, really intense, right? And so all of those things that I was going through or had learned, I was like, I would much prefer to give this to somebody who has the resources to be able to go a little further than I can go. And so that's kind of where that came out of. And I really tried to exhaust as many things that I could think of that would be helpful for me if I had to do it on my own. And so I think about sound checks. How would I approach that? I think about effective rehearsals. How would I approach that? I think about even understanding my own publishing. How would I approach that? How would I build a team? If I don't have, money, how would I engage the conversation of even knowing that it's okay to barter? And so many different things. How do I explore health for my voice, right? So that I'm approaching sound from a way. How could I think about music differently than perhaps I ever had? And it was just interesting conversations. For instance, one of the many lessons, I think it's P1, which is songwriting, .4, which is rhythm. And it talks about just how I learned how to think about music like a dancer. Like what? And then I mean, as a singer, I'm so focused in on like, okay, the approach and how the sound comes out. But everybody learns in general music that there are elements of music, rhythm, harmony, melody, form, right? And so, and if you really can understand and think about that, you can exploit it. For instance, how does Brandy, just kill on a track? You know what I mean? With all of the layers and things that she's doing, not to mention that she has great texture of her voice and tone, but she respects the hell out of rhythm. She understands how to pause when pauses are necessary. She understands how to layer, of course, that's harmony, right? But she understands how to give riffs and run and color when it needs to. And so all of those things, I'm like, if I can begin to systemize an understanding of them, if somebody else is as engaged as me, there's so many people in the world, right? I'm not the only one. If somebody is and could benefit from that being in one place, then I've done my synthesis. I've done that work.
yeah.
And so it's something that I at least want to pick up for myself when I forget, something, and it's crazy because I began writing this over the summer of 2017 and I was developing it for an online course. Didn't do well. It did not do well at all. Nobody cared. Right. And it's just like, it read like a textbook. And so I went through some colleagues, had some conversations. And I'm like, okay, so why don't I just turn it into a textbook? And that was a whole conversation too, which we can get into at another time. But so that's kind of the process of it. But the goal for me was to provide, from the creation standpoint, as much as I could that would give some very basics to people who need that. But at the very least, it would at least encourage inspiration for those even at the master level.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because for something like music that, often I think when people first come around to it, in the way that it comes off to just the average person, it's like, oh yeah, that's just like instinctual. That's like you just like you're born with that. Like some people are just singers, some people are drummers, some people understand rhythm, some people don't, and everything. And to a certain extent, like some people, I feel like maybe have been exposed to some stuff earlier on or more predisposition to learn music and as a concept in a way, in an easier way than maybe somebody who might have that same kind of thing, but for I mean math. That's a bad example for it, but for like other things, But I guess it's just the cool thing that I love about the textbook approach is that you break it down to a point where it's like, yeah, I mean, there's instinct and there's like a lot of stuff that you won't be able to quite put your finger on, but there are a lot of things that you can look at that like will make tangible results, So I love that about the book, and I guess how long from the inception to writing to editing to getting it published, and I'm sure I missed some steps in there, but for anyone in here who also might be interested in writing a book at some point, how long of a process is that?
I can understand why it takes years for people to publish even something like a textbook. I get it, and then I get why when people engage in this indie self-create space, while a lot of their books are like in like 22, point font, and like it's a quick book to read through. So like it's the novelty of actually did this process by myself because the tools are available to us, right? But the reality is it requires a lot of work. Again, I'm on the lean end of a budget, so I better do
Yeah.
this all by myself. I had engaged the conversation after I wrote the manuscript and prepared it, which was interesting because I prepared it in such a way to where all of my links, were actual just like
QR codes.
embeds. Right. Well, before they were QR codes, they were embeds. So
Mm.
like they were embeds to like the reflections were embeds to a Google response so that you can do it online. And I had to like go through all of that as I began to develop these lessons and change it, and then put them to QR codes, and then link those codes to be clickable, and then also scan them. I mean, it was just really easy. So having to do that, I put in so many hours of work. I'd say probably about a day. I'll say a good 24 hours, just changing all of those things together. But I mean, a day, 24 hours, of course, could be spread over however life sort of works for your schedule and how you plan that out. But so that was one aspect of it. The editing is one thing. I think that I'm a decent writer, but I'm not perfect. You know what I mean? And so that's a process. You would just sort of read and read and read, and to be honest, it still is a working document. It's in an ebook format, which allows me to be able to make updates. And so as updates are necessary, as I catch an error here or there, I'll fix that.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't
But
know you
having
could
to,
do that.
yeah, it's neat, and it's so paperback will it's gonna, you got to get as best as you can as it comes out, and it is what it is. But of course, you can exploit that too if you have on demand print or print by demand, to where you change that version and then make the next version, kind of thing. And so there are opportunities to exploit. But I just knew that, okay, so if I want to, publish a textbook and I want to utilize this, and I even want to use this for scholarship purposes, as I'm a junior scholar, so to speak. I don't even have an assistant professorship yet. I'm coming into that opportunity, I do believe. But as I'm building my CV, right, my resume, and trying to engage authentically, not just as a practitioner, but as an academic, um, the research is important. And part of that is being able to write. And so I wanted to get the book published through a reputable publisher, but I realized, hey, you really don't have a name. and in lieu of that, right, you need cash, and I didn't have monies, and I had the opportunity to engage some really quality publishers because I'm in a different space now. I'm with colleagues who are national and international scholars who have relationships, who already have books out with, companies that we've all heard, but coming into it, I'm like, okay, so I can see if I can exploit that. Great. And then there are some companies that will, basically do what you can do on your own,
Yeah.
self-publish, but they'll just systemize it for you so you feel as if you're getting a benefit, which in reality, publishing is just three things. It's some sort of development creatively, be it how you develop your systems or how you develop as a writer. It's pushing your work, the song plugging, the marketing of that, and then it's protecting your catalog. So that's the creative, that's the copyright administration, so to speak. So I had already understood the copyright piece. I'm already registering my copyright, my manuscript, But if that publishing company is not going to be robust in how they market your work, you might as well just do it yourself. You have more access to it. You can sort of, in some instances, if it works for you, to eliminate the middleman. Now, I will never, with this current iteration, be able to get that as a scholarship one, which is basically used to identify my work to move from assistant to tenured professorship. It won't be seen as that. But my hope is that it will be something very useful in the marketplace that tangentially could speak to that in academia and say, hey, this is the steam that is building, blah, 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 this is what it is. But more importantly, I just wanted to serve its purpose, and that's to serve creatives who are similar to me, or maybe not, maybe have a little bit more, opportunity to engage. And so all of that said, it took, I will say, honestly, I mean, if I didn't have anything else to do, it took, I'd say, a good 7 to 12 months to really begin to do the work that you need, because there's editing there, and then there's formatting there, and then there's a certain aspect of learning how to protect your copyright if you don't know that. And then, of course, there's your marketing strategies and how you're going to figure that piece out. Then there's visual graphic design. So, I mean, and it goes on and on and on, and you discover that. Not to mention the legal aspect. just because I'm publishing this work, I had to go and get legal, consultation at the very least to take a look at it, from a cursory standpoint to see, am I in the clear here? Because the book is kind of interesting in that I'm using opportunities to connect with videos that are interactive and that kind of piece. And so with that kind of conversation, I can't just put this out on my own. I better have an opportunity to think about this, with the legal mindset. And I don't have that. I'm not legally trained, and so things that I knew only brought me up so far, but it was so necessary to at least have legal, consultation. And that could take, depending on even, your relationship with who you're working with your entertainment lawyer, that could take a few weeks to a month or so to get things going. So it's an endeavor that if you're self-publishing, it's valiant. That first time might take you substantially longer, right? Because you've got to build the systems. Systems are
Yeah.
key. How you do stuff and then how you format. From this point on, I'll never have to format, and take as long, rather formatting a process because I already got one in the works and I can just use that as a template moving forward. But a good 1 to 2 years before you put something out, and I think that you're doing yourself justice.
Man, I mean, I think that's amazing. One, and it's almost like it's kind of funny that a lot of the stuff that you're talking about in your book applies to the stuff that you had to go through to get the thing out, right? So
So true, man.
I love that. Like like one of my favorite things that you had said about the like highest level of like, did you say learning is creation?
Hmm. Yes,
So like,
according to Bloom's taxonomy.
well, there you go. So and without giving everything away and all that, I want to kind of just like go through both sections, segmenting it out those similar way that you did. So the production
Perfect.
section of your book talks about songwriting, vocal techniques, instrumental techniques, engineering, producing, as well as artistic interpretation and design. I mean, it's super diverse, but what I love the most is that you started, and this is a phrase that you hear a lot in general, like whether people even like really think about it, it's just something that I feel like has been passed on. It's like it all starts with a song. But you started with you started production. You could have started the production section with production and with a lot of other things, but you chose to start that section with songwriting. Was that intentional? And could you explain why?
Absolutely. Just for that very reason, Chris, you nailed it, man. I realize that that's the creative 10% that the 90% of the world clamors over, right? And without that solid piece there, you don't have much to work on, right? There's a kind of a production term or engineering term that says you can't polish a turd. And so the reality, right? Like the reality is you have to start with the words because I think the words are what we connect with, right? And the agility that you have with your voice to be able to convey that message, right, as clearly as possible, only allows for the engager, only allows for the engager, right, to be able to hear what you're actually communicating. So if you're trash in terms of how you play and instruments, I think in many ways mimic the voice, right? Or what you're singing, then you cause a distraction for people to kind of get what you're saying. But to the extent where it's beautiful or it's technically flawless, and I don't have to focus or the ear doesn't have to subconsciously hear the mistakes or the inconsistencies, then I'm really genuinely picking up on what I'm actually saying to you, what I'm communicating. That's a beautiful part about this. Just like acting, the whole point of acting is not to appear to be acting, right? And so, like, it has to start with the song and the lyrics because that's really where we derive the most. Now, mind you, you could be listening to an instrumental song or whatever the case may be, and it perhaps could evoke a visual or a setting or wherever the situation is. But to that extent, you could describe that with words. Still shows us why the pen is mightier than the sword kind of thing, right? And so but it absolutely was intentional for sure because to be able to take poetry and to understand how to turn that into a song as a creative, going through that process, building as a writer, building as a vocalist, building as an instrumentalist, and at least understanding some critical pieces. Like I am by no means an instrumentalist at all. I'm a musician of a different kind, right? Like I understand music notation and to a degree. I can play a little piano, but I'm just not automatic like that. My instrument is absolutely my voice. But we all need to be able to at least pull from those fundamentals, even songwriting, even understanding the brilliance of when we hear, poetic devices. And I think it's so important to start there, because how often do we glaze over that in a seventh grade English or whatever, English course, just because it's not tied to context?
I
And
mean,
then how often
yeah.
do we hear brilliance in the music every single day? That's kind of the whole point of the SLAT analysis that I talk about. Was I'm interviewing a entering second grader, and she's able to pull out metaphor, not metaphor, because she couldn't do that in entering second grade, but she's able to fill in the blanks of words and then to convey meaning of what those words actually are conveying just through song and repetition because of what's playing. And so expert writing and expert singing, expertise is modeled all around us. To the extent we can understand how to make those connections, I think are key. And I think it does start with writing.
And I couldn't, when I was looking at the table of contents too, like I giggled to myself a bit because I was like, I bet that was intentional, and at least I hoped it was. And it makes me continue to like be really excited about the business side, which I'm going to talk about here, where you're talking about ownership, self-publishing, branding, building a team, business development, creative development, because they are totally different practices,
Absolutely.
touring, as well as planning and execution. Again, totally different things. Where because I think people get confused sometimes because they plan something like you got to do it and you got to try and you're gonna fail and that's okay. In fact, probably better that you do because then you'll know even
Facts.
better the next time. But I love
Okay.
I love that you didn't because a big challenge that I think as somebody who does work in the industry, you would think that like, oh yeah, I want what people to learn to be like, oh, they need the industry, they need to have a team in place. And in a lot of ways, people just hear somebody say, I have a manager, or I have a label, or I have an agent, or whatever, and they think that they have to have that too. I love that you start with the individual and what can they do to empower themselves. And I have to ask again for and this is the business section. Like the production section. Like again, guys, we glossed over this. There's a lot of really great information in there, and you're gonna have to check that out. But the same thing in the business side. A lot of stuff, but you choose to start with the individual. Was that intentional?
Absolutely. It sure was. Because I think in many ways we take for granted how we help experts by knowing more. And I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't, it doesn't mean that you have to do it on your own. It's certainly, you are your worst enemy or your best, support. And so to that extent, you may start that way. But understanding the language of contracts even helps a lawyer to help you when you're thinking about the fact that contracts are adversarial. And it behooves you to realize that what's on paper is what was on paper. Because now that you get a chance to engage it, it can look different based on your clout and how you negotiate. And so it's a working document. And so these types of things that if the modern creative just was not aware of that experience, then they're not even armed with language. Okay, so what if you don't understand the language? Do you at least, again, Bloom's taxonomy, do you at least remember some of the terms that when the time is appropriate and more urgent, you can apply those terms to what you need? Going back to the baby language, right? We see symbols and then we say eat. You may only be able to say eat. That's the language I want you to use. But to the extent where you can be more, you know, um, professional or more eloquent in your language, you say, well, I really want, a hamburger without a cheeseburger, without mustard or whatever. You can be more specific as to your taste and your desires, but at the very least, get some language in you. And so it starts at the individual level, because you need to know the work of pretty much your urgent few, right? The people who support you, your managers and that, even your lawyers. You need to know that. Um, and how to protect your stuff. You need to know that. I think a lot of people think that protecting their works happens, which I don't hear this conversation much anymore with respect to like poor man's copyright. But there's this notion that I still kind of get to this day, that you protect your works by sending them to, your PROs, your BMI or ASCAP, the other ones are invite only. But, and then they think that that's protecting it. And it is to a certain extent, but it's protecting the licensing of it,
Mm-hmm.
not the actual work in and of itself. And so understanding that it's your job to do that. And not only that, but there's slick kind of an expectation in industry for you to know that, because at the very least, a lot of the entry level positions require some music business experience. And in many ways, with a lot of the competition that we see, you're getting these degrees, or at least these programs where these young people are sort of have that understanding and that experience to a degree. And so it's a conversation being had. I know about the Library of Congress. I know that I should at least copyright my works, or should work with an organization that's going to help me to register the copyright. In truth, you copyright it when you meet criteria. But so it's these kind of things that if you are awesome at what you do on the production side and you're not so tight on the business side, it demystifies that for you a little bit. But perhaps if you're not as good, on the production side, there's some things that could help you to strengthen what you do if you're willing to invest in that time. And then taking a look at the business side perhaps gives one an opportunity to just synthesize a lot of the material. That's the thing too that I find is, we can read a lot of the textbooks and there are tons of material there, right? But like they're writing that for that purpose. The synthesis of sort of the many lessons that I want to give is if anything an opportunity to engage the conversation for us to go a little deeper, to give some foundation and to say, hey, wonder if I were to look this up on Google, wonder if I were to talk to an industry expert and have that conversation, wonder if I were to actually employ its use in my practice and see what happens. And so it's kind of that's what the purpose that it serves. But I think that you can't approach it without understanding that you have the onus of that, because an artist is principally in charge of their brand, no matter who's working for you, no matter what level,
Yeah.
at the highest level to the indie level.
But yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting that you were saying about like the application of it, because there is a lot of information. There's a reason why there are so many people who eventually you know bring on to your team and everything like that. But it's definitely recommended to be a strategic approach. And how much more strategic can you be than by understanding again the basic fundamentals in the language that you're trying to speak, right? Because communication is
Sure.
all about trying to get the thing that you're trying to communicate across to another individual in a way that they would receive it in a way that you meant for them to receive it. And I think having access to language and to being able to say the difference between eat and like this, I want to eat, like I want to eat this specific thing. It's cool that I've never seen it said in that exact way before, but it definitely helps my brain even more understand the importance of words and communicating and the understanding of what those words mean when you're talking to another person, especially when it comes to your business. And I love that you mentioned
Facts.
Donald Passman's book, All You Need to Know About the Music Business. I read that one when I was in school. How much of what you cover in your book in general and all of the sections comes from your own personal experience? Because you said a lot of what you went through a lot of stuff to learn it, but obviously you were referring to quite a few books to be able to um, build out maybe some of the other areas where you were learning yourself as you were making this book. So I guess I'm just curious, like what the balance of that was like, because I feel like in one way you could have written one book entirely based on your own experiences, and one book entirely based on what you interpreted from books and sources that you read. What was it like for you? It's clear that you married the two in your book, and I'm just curious, like
Yes.
how much of a balance you had in your mind when you were going through it.
No, such a phenomenal question, because a lot of the production stuff I certainly had to fumble through for sure. And it's language and how I picked up and how I began to make sense of basically those raw data, right? And so taking that in, I think that is sort of an all me piece. But when it comes more to the production, or rather the business side of that, there are a lot of just good things that I've pulled from my experiences teaching the textbooks. And so Passman is there, but I think that in some ways Passman might not be complete in how he looks at certain things. And of course, that's how it is. But David Nagger is another lawyer. Interesting how a lot of these writers are lawyers, which makes complete sense. They're entertainment lawyers. But then there's some other texts that kind of provide that conversation. There are some sources that aren't even textbooks. There's some good interviews that I've seen. Or there are just certain conversations that I've had. And I'm like, this interview really covers that, in a way that this lesson sort of wraps the lesson up really well. And so it's utilizing those moments that sort of bring it together. I would say it's probably a decent mix of it all, because it's coming from a position to where if I were reading those textbooks, what would I bring out of that I think would be key to know? Because there's, again, tons of words, tons of all of this to use, but like what's going to be essential. And so I'm hoping that what is read, are the essential pieces of what you need to know. And so even when it comes to the contract, the contract piece there, I have no legal training in that regard. But when I take a look at contracts, I'm thinking to myself, like, these are the things that don't change. So if it doesn't change, I'm going to basically scribe about that. And if there's opportunities to supplement that, then I certainly want to do that. And so there's even chapters where I give like a big list, sort of like you would do in an introduction chapter of an article, in a journal, where you would just sort of list it like, here are a lot of people sort of before me framing this conversation and thinking of it in this way, or here's where they sort of have the conversation. Here's where I want to further that conversation. Here's what it looks like in context. And so it's some of that. I kind of bring out that scholarly piece, but and of course you'll see as you go through the text where it's specific and everything is laid out as it's cited. But I say most of it really comes from how I'm internalizing that, what I've experienced, and I try to give a lot of anecdotes to sort of make sense of that, because it's one thing to see it, but then the how question is really not really answered that well. And I think that Passman does it in a really interesting way, but he's doing it from the other side of advisory. He's doing it as a lawyer dealing with all these people. And so he's giving you deal points, especially when it comes to this 10th edition that just came out. I'm not giving that. That's not my perspective. My perspective is, how do I take how do I take data really from all of these different experts, be it directly or indirectly, and make sense of a brand? And so to the extent that I can do that, that's really most of what the language that comes out. And so it should read technical to some degree, but most of it should really read as if I'm having a conversation right with you in your living room.
No, I appreciate that, because I definitely, sometimes when something comes across, for me at least, too textbooky, I zone out, and I have like PTSD of like high school, like learning about things that I don't want to learn. But like something like this, like that's where again formatting becomes super important, right? Because and the way that you're explaining these things comes across like a conversation with somebody who's knowledgeable on the thing that they're speaking about. So,
I'm glad to hear that feedback on the other side.
yeah, and I appreciate. And again, I'm not through the whole thing, so I might have some more notes for you at some point, or I might catch some stuff and I'll let you know. But
Please.
but I was gonna say, like, are there any resources that you would recommend to people besides your book, of course, that would be a great pairing with it? Like movies, you had mentioned 20 Feet from Stardom. There's a ton of great interviews that are out there in the world, but I guess for you specifically, like, could you just name a few like books and movies, interviews, etc., that you'd highly recommend?
Absolutely, I would love to, Chris. It's funny because I do this every Fridays in my classes. I call it tip sessions, the theory and practice. And so we get a chance to talk about the text in a way that perhaps is a bit more tangible, more practical. Dre London has a phenomenal interview. Dre London interview. I forgot.
For those of you, real quick, Dre London is the manager for Post Malone. Also, does he also work? No, he's not Roddy Ricch. That's a different guy. Who else does Dre? Post Malone, pretty much you could just start there. But he also works with like a bunch of other great artists. I think Tyga is another one that he works with. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that, because it's that background that like it's again classroom on YouTube, right? Like nuggets being dropped because of his experiences, and he's dealing with a high profile artist, and he just, his story and how he sort of described it, he just kind of came back up, used a lot of just real good business techniques, right, to be successful, to be visible, just real connections with people, and so that's a really good one to take a look at. We use that. 20 Feet from Stardom is a good film. I absolutely like Head Full of Dreams, the Coldplay documentary. That's phenomenal. I think that's a great story that really tells of the prophetic journey of artistry, right? Having somebody who has a vision that is so compelling that although reality hasn't made sense of it yet, you persist. Few people kind of buy into that. Your gift is undeniable. And oh my goodness, it's just crazy to see the dynamics of that process. So that's another good one to see. You can sort of see efficacy there as an artist, and just how you got to fail a little bit and learn and figure it out. And sometimes, you are not exactly happy, but the world loves it and you go with it. Coldplay wasn't supposed to stick. You know what I mean? That wasn't. So it's kind of one of those conversations to where it's like, yeah, it's rich with the background stories that make us feel like we see ourselves there, and can further even what we do well. So that's a good one. 20 Feet from Stardom is amazing. It tells of many unsung heroes. Um, uh, oh goodness, The Godfather, Avant. His name evades me. It's the Godfather documentary.
You're talking about Godfather?
Let me see. But it's a documentary on the Godfather. They call him basically the Godfather in the industry. He was an agent. The Black Godfather is what it is. Clarence Avant. And let me tell you,
I have not seen that one. I gotta check that out.
That is a good one. Clarence Avant, you've got to check it out. So that's a good one. I've only seen it once and I need to see it again. I need to prioritize it. It was a quick moment, but I tell you, it's rich. Let me see what's another one that I really enjoy. Oh, Cadillac Records. That's a good one. Cadillac Records is just a great film when you think about the transition of sort of music that was captured, rather music that, happened live, to this transition of music being captured and recorded. And so that process, there's Fisk in there with John Work, a little bit of a discussion sort of at the beginning.
That's cool.
But I like that process because it sort of has that conversation of now music is recorded and how that process, how that changed. And so that's a good one to take a look at. There's some things that we see, just some good American conversations that come out of those films as well that I enjoy. Textbooks, of course, All You Need to Know About the Music Business, Donald Passman. I enjoy The Music Business Explained in Plain English. I'm not sure if it's updated as of recent, but David Nagger, it's a really quick text. It allows you to sort of understand the artist journey and then the songwriter journey and how to sort of maximize that. Ari Hurston has a text, How to Make It in the New Music Business. I have it on my bookshelf. That's a good one. They're just sort of exploiting, how to build your brand kind of as an indie. And it has a lot of practical tips there that they've seen and success there. Of course, the Music Business Handbook and Career Guide, Baskerville and Baskerville is a good one. That's another text that sort of rides along with Passman. Passman is sort of seen as the industry Bible. I like that. There's the distinction between the Passman text and the Baskerville text. Passman giving you a lot of deal points for the artist, sort of understanding the artistry from a contractual standpoint, a clout standpoint, right? Giving you that feedback, understanding how to support yourself from team. He sort of starts with team first and then branches out to understanding the role of those major institutions and how to make money. But the thing that I like about the Baskerville text, the Music Business Handbook, is that it's written by a scholar, by somebody who just provides tons of information. It's almost too much information to be able to pull from. And it may not necessarily be seen as what is accurately happening in industry based on a genre or whatever the case may be. But I tell you what, it really, really reads well and it gets us thinking. They even postulate conversations, and we were having them last semester before COVID. It was crazy with respect to virtual reality and augmented reality and just how that space will live before any of this stuff happened. We were talking about that. I had Shannon Sanders in my classroom leading some discussions in my tip sessions, and we explored that also in the textbook. But those are some really good texts to look at that I enjoy. I think you'll enjoy that Dre London interview. And yeah,
I gotta check that. I gotta check that out at some point. And again, I'm gonna put it in here for everybody, but Dr. MarQo, who I've been interviewing here for the past hour and a half, is if you're just now tuning in, you're really late, and you'll be able to go back and watch this whole thing. But he just put a book out called Creative Innovation: A Creative's Guide to Creative Efficacy. The link is right there at the bottom in the chat. So if you want to go and get a copy of it, you absolutely should. I'm excited for all of the other stuff that you're going to continue to do. I appreciate you being on here and for everything that you do to empower creatives through your teachings and your example in general. Like, not only with executives who are out of school but are lifelong learners, but also for your students that really you're the first step into the real world, or so to speak. Despicable Mod, thanks for joining us. But we've reached the part of the stream where we're going to raid a musical channel and go and say
Nice.
what's up and support creatives. For those of you who might just be tuning in, I'm Chris. Every Wednesday we do a unreleased demo listening session as a community, providing feedback. It's all positive, it's all cool. Don't be afraid. Send your music over and we'll all listen to it together and have a blast and celebrate it, especially when it comes out. That's our favorite, when we see a demo that got played months before finally come out. And then on Fridays I get to interview amazing people. I guess it's this way, with the way my camera is, like Dr. MarQo JUSREALL Patton here. Every Friday we get to I don't know if they're always going to be different, so I can't promise you that it's going to be better than this one, because this one's been amazing for me to be able to I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope anybody who's watching this got to learn a bunch too. But basically the point when we're rating, since you're new to Twitch, is we're going to take the viewers who are here and we're going to go and support another creative. Would you like to pick that person, or would you like me to just guide that whole thing and then you just like watch? It's totally up to you, and I wouldn't blame you either way.
You know, I am really new here. I actually don't mind taking shotgun. I want to enjoy the ride.
Okay, cool. So we're looking in chat. If you guys have somebody who's playing music right now that you'd like to show some love to and support, could be a producer, could be a singer, could be a writer, could be a saxophone. I mean, it would be dope. If somebody has a saxophone that's going on right now, like, I'm feeling that. But
That'd be cool.
there's this guy with pink headphones and glasses. I don't know if that's the vibe. I'm just like looking through the music stuff right now to see what channels are live that we can pop in. Oh, there's a drummer. Drummers are a lot of fun. Oh, there's somebody who's celebrating a 2-year stream anniversary. I think we should jump.
Oh, nice.
Let's jump into that.
Let's do it.
His name.
Happy anniversary.
Let's see. His name is Calvin Thomas. It's his 2-year stream anniversary. So everybody who's here, thank you for being here.
Thank you,
MarQo, Dr. MarQo. Thank you for being here. I really, the last time we saw each other was at that Grammy event late last year in person.
Yep.
I feel like that was the last time I saw like anybody in person, was like that event. But I sincerely hope that we get to bump into each other and that we get to have many more conversations like this, especially as I continue to read your book. Thank you for being here and for sharing all of this knowledge. Thank you again for everything that you do to empower creative individuals and people in general. I love your spirit and your approach to everything. It feels very, it just has this personal touch to it that I feel like in the creative process you can kind of feel like you're being pushed out of it, or like it's like a circle that like you're not allowed to be a part of, but you're always so welcoming, and you're just like, you want to know some stuff? Me too. Let's learn.
Yes, all day. That's it, man.
Okay.
Yo, I truly appreciate the time. You're just phenomenal. I mean, you touch so many lives. You see so many places. You just implant, man. And then to be able to, like, I didn't meet you at first at the Grammy event.
Yeah.
I met you working with these young people, and that man, mind you, being a kid in the candy store, I'm up here to grab as many notes as I can selfishly, but just to reflect and be outside of that. You didn't have to give us your time, and you did it on multiple occasions, man. And so to that, I honor you. I thank you. I appreciate you. It's your heart that makes the connection that we need to see so pivotal for these young artists, man. So thank you so much.
Yeah, man. And I, again, can't thank you enough for the opportunity. So y'all, say bye and thank you to Dr. MarQo. Stay in touch with him on social media. You want to learn more? He's happy to teach you. We're going to raid Calvin Thomas right now. Stick around. Check out his music and wish him a happy stream anniversary. I'm so excited to go. You guys got to go crazy in the chat. Dr. MarQo, thank you sincerely. I'm clicking this raid thing right now. It's going to have everybody like loop into a thing. I don't know if you see it on your end.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So as soon as it shows that everybody is ready to raid, we're going to go and raid. All right. And Perfect. It should switch in 3, 2, 1. Peace out, y'all.
Peace.
There we go.